I have always thought that there are places where time does not work as it should, places where the past not only left scars, but is still there, floating in the air, waiting for someone to discover it. I never believed in the paranormal, but after what I experienced in that barracks, I have no other way to explain it. I am Sergio, a former Chilean soldier. During my years of service, I went through many things, some good and others that I would rather forget. But there is one in particular that stayed with me, something I could never explain, something that still haunts me when I close my eyes at night. It happened years ago when I was assigned to a barracks in a rural area, an old place with more history than we were told. It was not a large or strategically important place, but it was still used for training and personnel protection. The people of the nearby town looked at it with some suspicion, as if they were avoiding getting too close. One of my colleagues mentioned that it had previously been a detention and extermination center in times of conflict, the scene of numerous violations of human rights, and I knew then that the place was already charged with a lot of energy. I arrived at night with the cool air hitting my face as I got off the truck. From the first moment I felt something strange, as if the atmosphere there was heavier than usual. There was not much lighting, just a few flickering lights that barely kept the darkness at bay. I was not worried at the time, as I had already spent nights in much worse conditions. We were assigned rooms in the main building. But I had to sleep in the most remote part, a corridor where there were only storage rooms and an abandoned office that they said they used to use for interrogations. I did not think much about it, I simply put my things away and tried to rest, but not even 2 hours had passed when I was awakened by a strange sound. It was not a loud noise, more like a murmur, like distant voices mixed with the wind. I got up, opened the door and looked down the hall. It was empty, the light flickered a little, but I didn't see anything out of the normal. I assumed they were colleagues on some night watch. So I went back to bed, but it wasn't so easy to sleep. There was a moment when I felt someone slowly passing in front of my door. I didn't see shadows and I didn't hear footsteps either. I just felt a somewhat inexplicable presence, as if someone was standing right outside, looking at me through the wood. I told myself it was just tiredness and ended up falling asleep even with that feeling. The next morning as I walked through the barracks, I came across in the small room where they stored old documents, there were dusty folders stacked on shelves and boxes full of files that looked like they hadn't been touched in decades. I've always been curious about the history of the places where I'm assigned, so I started looking through some papers. The first were maintenance reports, supply lists, and personnel records, but after a while I found something else. An older folder, different from the others. It had no title, just a serial number that was almost illegible. When I opened it, I was shocked to read. The information was a list of missing persons. There were names, dates, and some photos of young men with vacant looks, people who were never found. I read some descriptions and saw that almost all of them mentioned the same thing. Detained for reasons that were never specified, transferred to unknown locations, none registered in official records, and then I saw it, my last name. I had to read it several times to be sure it wasn't my mind playing a joke on me, but there was a man with my same last name. Disappeared in that same barracks decades ago. The chill ran down my spine. I had never heard in my family about someone who had served in that area, much less someone who had disappeared without a trace. But there was his name, right on that forgotten document. My mind tried to find a logical explanation. It could be a coincidence, someone unrelated to me, but part of me knew it wasn't that simple. One night, while I was doing my rounds, I noticed one of the lights flickering in the narrow hallway. It wasn't the first time this had happened. But this time there was something different. In the dim light I could see a motionless figure at the end of the hallway. I thought it was another soldier, so I tried to call out to him, but there was no answer. The figure stood there, his posture oddly rigid. I took a few steps forward and suddenly felt a chill run down my spine. The temperature in that spot was noticeably lower than in the rest of the building. When I tried to focus my vision better, the figure seemed to move slightly, as if taking a step forward. But I didn't hear any footsteps. I decided to turn back and report the anomaly, but as I turned to leave, a hoarse, distorted voice whispered my name. At that instant, all the lights in the hallway flickered and a deep humming sound deafened me. I was okay, but I knew I wasn't. I didn't mention anything I saw, I didn't tell anyone about the name on the list or the figure in the hallway, but I couldn't stay in doubt. I looked for more information about my family, called some relatives, and finally, after insisting, an uncle revealed something I never imagined. My grandfather had a brother who had disappeared when he was young. It was never talked about much, only that one day he was taken away for a crime he didn't commit. Sadly, he was never seen again and my family never knew what happened to him. Now I knew he had been in that barracks. And somehow he was still there. I don't know what he expected from me, I don't know if he just wanted someone to know his story, if he wanted to be recognized or if he was simply trapped in time. In a place that didn't let him go. All I know is that I left that barracks with the feeling that he had found me before I found him. Sometime later I was reassigned to another area of the region, but I never spoke of this with my superiors and I never returned to that base, and to this day I still wonder if it was really me who found him or if he was the one who was somehow waiting for me. We continued. I don't know if anyone here will believe me, I guess not. I care a lot. In the end, the reason I tell it is not to convince anyone but to let it go, to get it out of my head even if it's for a few minutes. I've learned that true hell doesn't always come when you die. Sometimes it comes to you much sooner, and the worst of all is that you bring it yourself. Years ago I moved in a dark world, a world that I now try to forget. I was part of something that many call business, although there is nothing clean about it. I worked for a cartel in the north doing jobs that not everyone is willing to do. It was easy at first, a shot here, a call there, and the money came without asking too many questions, but like everything in life, one gets used to it, it becomes routine. I never cared about what happened after each job or who they were. For me they were simply orders that I had to follow until one day I stopped feeling good about what I did. I don't know when exactly everything changed, but I started to look at the people I eliminated, to remember their faces, to think about their families. I realized that, no matter how much money I earned, it wasn't worth what I was losing. So I left. Well, I tried to. I knew it wouldn't be easy to get out of that world, but I had some contacts who owed me favors and they helped me disappear. I moved to a small town forgotten by time, far away from everything. Nobody knew me. And that was the idea. I thought that by leaving it behind, things would start to improve. I was wrong. The first year in the village was quiet. I got a job as a guard in a nearby factory. Nothing special, but enough to live in peace. The days passed slowly and the nights were even slower. They were quiet, but it suited me. I needed that calm to forget, but then things started to happen. At first I didn't pay attention to them. I thought it was my mind playing tricks on me. After all, when you've been looking over your shoulder for years, it's hard to let go of that fear. The first time I noticed it was one night about 2 years ago. I was alone in my house. It was late and I was about to go to bed. The house isn't very big, just 1 floor and 2 rooms, nothing special. I went to the bathroom to wash my face, and as I leaned over I felt something strange, that feeling you get when you know someone is watching you. I immediately turned to the window. There was a backyard and there it was. It was just a shadow, but I recognized that figure. As soon as I saw it, it was standing a few feet from the house looking towards the window. My heart stopped for a second and I swear I felt my blood run cold. It was one of them, one of the ones I had eliminated. His face was blurry in the darkness, but I knew it was him. I remembered it well because before I did the work he had knelt down begging for forgiveness, something that never usually happened. I understood why, but now he was in front of me staring at me. I turned off the bathroom light, trembling. I didn't have the courage to look out again. I got into bed as if that would protect me, but I knew it wouldn't. I spent the night awake without sleep, waiting for that thing to appear again. However, it didn't. The next day I woke up exhausted, but convinced that I had dreamed it, or so I wanted to believe. Over the next few weeks I began to notice more strange things at times. Walking through the village, I would notice someone following me. At first it was just a fleeting shadow I saw out of the corner of my eye. Other times while I was in the car I thought I saw someone in the back seat, but when I turned my head there was no one. These were all small details that made me feel that something was not right, but the most disturbing thing was when I began to recognize those faces. It was as if little by little all the people I had executed, those I tried to forget, began to appear before me. Around me at first there was just one, then another, and so on. Some I saw from afar, others just for a second, but they were there, silent, watching, and every time I saw them I smelled that smell, a smell of damp earth mixed with gunpowder. It was a penetrating aroma that brought back memories I did not want to relive. Once, walking through the center of the village, I came across one of them. His face was white as if he had not seen sunlight in years, and his eyes, empty. My heart started pounding in my chest. We looked at each other for a few seconds and then he just disappeared into the crowd. I tried to keep walking as if nothing had happened, but my legs were shaking. I knew it was impossible, that he couldn't be there. He was already dead. The apparitions began to be more frequent, so much so that I thought I was going crazy. I even avoided leaving the house at night, but it didn't matter. Sometimes I could feel that someone was in the room with me, even if I was alone. I heard whispers in the dark, footsteps that didn't make any noise, but I knew that something or someone was there. One night I was sitting in my small living room with the lights off, trying to calm my mind. I heard a loud noise coming from the yard. I got up with my heart racing, and when I looked out the window I saw him again. That figure, that same man, was there, standing in the middle of the yard. But this time his face was clearer, more visible. His skin was pale, almost gray, and his eyes, although dark, seemed to pierce me. He didn't say anything. He just looked at me. It was then that I understood that he wasn't going to leave, that he had come to stay that night. For the first time in years I prayed. I'm not a religious man, never have been, but in that moment, with that man standing in my yard, I didn't know what else to do. I felt like the air was escaping me, like something was squeezing my chest. I prayed for him to go away, to be left alone, but the feeling didn't go away. I knew that somewhere in my soul I was paying for what I had done. The next morning, when I finally dared to go out into the yard, there was nothing, but the smell was still there, that mix of dirt and gunpowder. Since that day I haven't been able to get rid of that feeling of being watched, of being followed. No matter where I go, there is always someone there watching me. From a distance I have tried to leave him behind, but it is impossible. I don't know if they are real ghosts or if it's my conscience that is torturing me, but what I do know is that in the end one cannot escape from one's past, and even though I have distanced myself from that world, what I did remains with me like a debt that cannot be paid. As I said at the beginning, hell is not a place you go to when you die. Sometimes you bring it with you. And it accompanies you wherever you go. Like and subscribe if you are enjoying it. We continue. I am Edgar, and I was part of the Mexican army for almost 10 years. Of all that I lived in service, there were many hard things, experiences that marked me, but only one continues to haunt me to this day. It has nothing to do with combat or operations or confrontations. No, what happened to me that night was different. It was something that I could never explain, and that over the years has made me think about what things really inhabit. The lonely roads of this country. This happened in 2016 when I was assigned to a highway patrol unit in the north. We were sent to check routes with reports of suspicious activity. Sometimes drug trafficking, other times vehicle theft, kidnappings, or simply something that alerted civilians and required inspection. The area where this happened is one of those where you can drive for miles without seeing anything but hills with scattered towns and gas stations every 30 or 40 kilometers. In the early morning there was not a Alma, we received a radio alert about a cargo truck stopped on the side of the road. A semi-truck driver who passed by reported seeing it with its lights on and the door open, but it did not stop. He said it seemed suspicious to him. Since we were about 20 minutes away from the point, we were ordered to check. When we arrived, it was almost 2 in the morning. The road was completely silent, barely illuminated by the unit's headlights and the truck's spotlights. It was a large vehicle, one of those used to transport heavy merchandise. With the engine off but the cab on, there were no signs of a struggle, no blood, no broken glass, but no one in sight. My partner and I cautiously climbed out, checking the perimeter. Nothing. There were no fresh footprints in the dirt, no signs that anyone had gotten out and walked around. I walked over to the driver's door and peeked in. The first thing I noticed was that the truck's radio was on, but it was only playing white noise and irregular, choppy sound. On the passenger seat was a backpack with clothes, a half-empty bottle of water, and a wallet with IDs. The driver was a man in his 40s, but he wasn't there. We decided to check the back of the truck. My partner shined the flashlight in while I tried to open the door, but it was locked. We thought about breaking it, but before we did, we heard something in the cab, a sound like someone moving the radio. We went back to the driver's door and saw that the radio was no longer playing white noise. Now we heard something different. They were words, but they were not well understood. It sounded like someone was speaking in a low voice, but it was choppy and distorted. Then suddenly a clear phrase was heard through the sound, a deep and dragged voice that said, "It's worse than hell here." We were speechless. We looked around with our flashlights to see if we could see anything else, but the road was empty. Not a single car had passed in the whole time we had been there. Still, we made a quick turn around the truck with our weapons ready, and evidently there was no one. My partner tried to turn off the radio. But when he touched it, the sound suddenly disappeared as if it had never been on. We looked at each other without saying anything. Something didn't fit and nothing had a logical explanation. We sent the report and decided to wait for the support team. While we were doing so, we began to review the truck's papers, and that was when everything became stranger. The last inspection of the truck was a week ago. However, the engine was still hot as if it had been recently used. It made no sense. The worst came later when we shone a brighter light on the side of the truck. We saw marks on the body. They weren't bumps or scratches, they were stains, dark, dry stains that looked like they had been dragged. As we got closer, noticeably, right next to the truck there were remnants of duct tape and fragments of cut rope. It didn't take an expert to realize that something very bad had happened there. My partner looked at me and, without needing to speak, we knew that we had stumbled upon something that didn't belong there, something that might not be in it anymore. A few minutes later the support team arrived. They checked the truck, took photos and inspected the area. They found no further clues about the driver, only what seemed to have been an attempt to move or hide something, but what really left me uneasy was the last thing that the superiors told us. After making some calls, the truck did have an owner. It was the man with the wallet, but he had disappeared along with his vehicle 3 days ago and there were no records of the truck having passed through any checkpoint, toll booth or gas station. At that time they found it there in the middle of nowhere with no one knowing how it got there. The following days the case disappeared from the reports, there was no more talk about the subject and we did not receive any more news about what happened to the truck or the driver, but I continue to wonder what it was that we found that night. Someone else drove it to that point because there were no tracks or traces of recent activity. What was it that he said on the radio? I can't stop thinking about that night, and with that truck I want to know an answer if it is. That it could have simply been an abandoned vehicle, or that maybe what we found and heard was from something beyond our understanding, and the worst thing is that to this day no one knows what happened to the driver. We continue. My name is Caesar, I am 35 years old and I lead a quiet life driving cargo trucks. For about 5 years I have been working for a transport company that makes shipments between cities in the north. The truth is I have seen everything on the road. Accidents, engine problems, even some other dangerous type, but what happened a couple of months ago, that was different. It changed my perspective on life in general. That night I took a night shift to make an urgent delivery. My boss had called me that same day in a serious tone. Caesar, I need you to do a special order tonight. Nothing out of the ordinary, but we will pay you double. What you have to do is pick up a load at the warehouse in Santa Lucia and take it to Hidalgo. It is important and I do not want any failures. No, it was not unusual for jobs like this to arise, especially if there were merchandise that needed to be transported quickly, so I didn't hesitate to accept. Besides, I needed the money. I started at about 9 p.m. The cargo was a normal-looking box, sealed and unlabeled as if it were waiting for me. Nothing out of the ordinary, I thought, but the route I chose was a secondary one, a less-traveled route that I sometimes took to avoid traffic and save time. After almost 2 hours of travel, I found myself surrounded by the darkness and silence that seems to surround it on certain roads. At about 11 my phone rang. It was an unknown number. When I answered, a thick, monotonous voice spoke to me directly. Caesar, have you already picked up the cargo in Santa Lucia? I answered affirmatively, although somewhat surprised. It was not the voice of my boss or anyone I knew. Okay, change your plans, we need you to make a stop before. There is a point marked on your GPS, leave the box in the place. Someone else will pick it up. I didn't like last-minute instructions. And even less so if they came from a stranger. I tried to ask who it was. But the line was already dead. I looked at my GPS and sure enough, a spot appeared marked on the screen in an isolated spot about 20 minutes from my position. I took a deep breath and decided to follow the directions. I knew something wasn't right, but in this job sometimes you have to obey without question. After a while I arrived at the indicated spot. It was a lonely curve next to a small clearing in the woods, one of those places that seems to have no life for miles around. I parked and got out of the truck. I felt the tension grow in my chest. But I told myself that it was just another delivery, there was nothing to fear. As I put the box on the ground and turned to go back to the truck, I heard the sound of a pickup truck approaching. I stood still and soon a black pickup truck stopped a few meters from where I was. 3 men got out. Looking closely at them, I noticed that 2 of them were carrying weapons and the one who seemed to be the leader, a robust man with an expressionless face, approached slowly. You are Caesar, the driver? He asked in a low and heavy voice as if his tone of voice already dictated the authority in the situation. Yes, I was just making a delivery. I answered trying to sound calm, although inside I felt an emptiness in my stomach. The man observed me for a few seconds and then looked at the box on the floor. Do you know who you work for? Caesar asked in a threatening tone, as if he expected me to really understand the situation. I shook my head, starting to feel that there was something strange about this assignment. It seems that they haven't told you the truth. Come with us, there are things that, seeing by instinct I knew that saying no. It wasn't an option, so I got into the truck with the other 2 men, leaving my truck behind. The leader, sitting next to me, kept staring at me, giving me a constant sense of danger. As we moved forward, the man began to speak to me in a direct and blunt manner. The box you left is a message, Caesar. People in this business rarely understand words. They understand the warnings on the box. I asked, surprised by my own boldness. Something you need to see. With those words we continued forward. Until we reached an abandoned building, a place that looked like it had once been a small motel. At the entrance, the men opened the box and I could see its contents. Documents, photos and a couple of personal items stained with something dark, probably dried blood. It was at that moment that I understood the weight of what I had been carrying. "Look closely at this," said the leader, pointing to the photos. "These are men who tried to betray the boss, and this, Caesar, is the end that awaits those who think they can mock him." I felt a chill run through me. That box was a kind of statement, a brutal warning to anyone who tried to cross these people's path. I tried to stay calm, but I knew my breathing was betraying me. "And why are you showing me this?" "I'm just the driver," I said, unable to contain the tremble in my voice. "So you understand that when you drive, for us you're not just the driver, you're part of something bigger and you can't escape." When I finished listening to his words, I realized the magnitude of the danger I was in. I hadn't been hired for a normal job, but for something much darker. One of the men looked at me with disdain and muttered under his breath, "Don't forget what you saw tonight, because if you talk, no one will listen to you." Finally, they let me return to the truck alone and in complete silence. As soon as I moved a few meters, I noticed the men watching me. From a distance, I felt their gazes as I disappeared into the darkness of the night. I drove for hours as I tried to process what had happened. I tried to calm myself as I looked in the rearview mirror, every now and then fearing that I might see a car following me, but there was nothing, just the empty road that stretched out into the solitude of the highway. I gave up being a truck driver after that night.